Is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everybody and welcome to the HP Dementia webinar. It's Thursday the 4th of June and this is the fourth in our series of afternoon webinars in Dementia Awareness Week. My name's Wendy Chambers and along with Lynsey McKee and Elaine Hunter, we're your background organisers today. And on our panel we've got Christine Steele, who's the HP consultant from Greater Glasgow and Clyde, and Christine will be introducing the topic and then passing over to her colleague Lynsey McKee, occupational therapist, also from GGC. We've got a large audience joining us today, but we really want to hear from you and we'd like to hear your thoughts and your questions throughout the webinar. So your way to do that is if you move your mouse on your screen just now or your finger on your iPad or phone, you'll see a small icon that's a speech bubble with a question mark inside. If you tap on that, it will allow you to put your questions or your thoughts to the panel. And Alison and Elaine will be putting your questions in the question and answer at the end. The last thing I'll remind you is that we are recording the webinar and you will receive a link to the recording. So I'd like to pass you over now to Christine Steele.
Thank you, Wendy. I'm really delighted to be here to introduce the fourth Dementia Awareness Week webinar. For those of you like me who have joined in over the past 3 days, I'm sure that you share my eagerness just to get going and hear what Lynsey has in store for us. But as we're nearing the end of the week, I wanted just to pause briefly to reflect on the diversity that has been shown in both the webinars and the blogs to date. A really rich diversity that captures the wealth and extent of the AHP approach as it is described in Connecting People, Connecting Support. It's been wonderful to hear from clinicians firsthand and to share how AHPs are making a difference to people living with dementia. Today's example comes from an acute hospital setting, and I think it's really summed up perfectly by the hashtag that's used by the University of the West of Scotland when they're promoting the work of their dementia champions and dementia specialist improvement leads on social media. One wee thing. As AHPs, I think too often we can play down the work we do and the impact we make, saying it's just a wee thing, when often it's that one wee thing that makes a positive difference for somebody who's living with dementia. I don't think there's ever been a time where that has been more the case than now. The last few months have seen a huge change to the already potentially daunting world of general hospital care. So it's really reassuring for me to know that in the midst of all that's happening, that passion and that drive to improve care for people with dementia is still right at the heart of AHP practice. And so with that in mind, I'm going to hand you over to Lynsey, and I look forward to hearing about her experiences as an OT within a busy inpatient setting in these most complex and difficult of times. Thank you, and over to you, Lynsey.
Thank you very much, Christine and Wendy, for your introductions this afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks again for joining us today, especially at the end of the working day and near the end of the week as well. Firstly, I want to tell you a little bit about me. So I'm a clinical specialist occupational therapist in older people's services for NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde, and I work in the north sector of Glasgow. So we cover the north and the east area of the city and the surrounding area. Throughout my career, I've mostly worked with older people in a variety of settings, including acute inpatient, rehabilitation, and a short spell in a community team. It's fair to say I've always had a passion for working with older people, and this passion has led me to a Master's in Gerontology and Aging at the University of Stirling, and I'm just about to go into my final year. So what are our aims for today? So I want to give you an overview of the benefits of meaningful activity for older people in acute hospitals. I want to explain how our occupational therapy volunteer service came about and to discuss some of the benefits and challenges of that service. I want to give you a brief insight into a multi-agency project involving occupational therapy, our volunteers, NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde's library service and Glasgow Life. I want to give a very brief overview of the impact of COVID-19 on acute hospitals and to explain briefly how COVID-19 can affect older people living with frailty. And then I want to explain how the Hospital Times was developed and to discuss the impact that that's had. So now that you know a little bit about me, I'd quite like to know a little bit about all of you and where you're from. So we're going to have a bit of a poll that we've been doing every day, just to see who's with us today.
So this is Wendy, and the polls, people are still voting on the poll at the moment. I'll just leave it open a few more seconds.
Okay, so at the moment, as we'd probably expect, the majority of people, 76%, are HPs, but a good range as well. We've got some people here who are either living with or supporting somebody living with dementia, 14% from other health or social care. So there is a range, but the majority is 76% allied health professionals.
Great, well, everyone's welcome, and hopefully you all find something beneficial from today. So just to give you a little bit of a background and context to our developments, for those of you who aren't local, this is Glasgow Royal Infirmary. It happens to be one of my favourite pictures, and it's taken from the necropolis looking on to the infirmary itself, and you can see Glasgow Cathedral on the left. Our older people's wards are housed in the two oldest buildings, which are directly in the centre of that picture. And these make up part of the complex of buildings that are the Royal Infirmary. We have 9 active older people's wards with a total of 134 older people's assessment beds. These are mostly Nightingale in style. Some of the wards do have 4-bedded bays, and every ward has 1 single room. These older people's wards are typically for those aged over 75, living with frailty or multi-morbidity, that is 2 or more medical conditions, who require a multidisciplinary assessment as part of their inpatient care. Although our wards have been refurbished recently, there are limitations due to the design and age of the building. So like many acute sites, we don't have any day room facilities or dining room facilities for our patients. We currently don't have any activity coordinators, although they are available in our off-site rehabilitation beds at Straub Hill and Lightburn Hospital. We're very lucky to have a very well-attended dementia cafe that runs monthly, and that provides social interaction, as well as a place for patients and families to get advice or to speak to a range of professionals. This is very well supported by our patients' families and staff, and it's had very positive feedback. As a site, we're also very lucky to have a number of dementia champions and What Matters to You champions, who promote patient-centred care and best practice. Before I go on to discuss the development ideas, I think it's important to touch on why meaningful activity is important, because essentially that's what all our development is about. As an occupational therapist, I am passionate about the importance of activity and about facilitating people to engage in activities that matter to them. Meaningful activity can include any physical, leisure, or social activity that is important to someone. So it can be anything that somebody would want to do. For example, combing your hair, playing a board game, getting washed and dressed, reading, engaging in a conversation, shopping, which is a personal favourite, or gardening, for example. Meaningful activity is so important for individuals. Being engaged in meaningful activity allows people to meet their basic psychological needs. It gives people a sense of independence, a sense of achievement and a purpose. And importantly, it can reduce feelings of stress. And I think that's something that we can all relate to. I know if I've had a bad day, reading a book will help me to relax. And I'm sure you can all think of activities that will help you when you're stressed. In turn, meaningful activity can be utilised to reduce distress. It can also provide an opportunity for reminiscence and for cognitive stimulation. It also builds self-esteem. It encourages participation in other activity. It increases someone's confidence and provides a sense of identity. I think you can see why I'm very passionate about how important it is. But why is this important for patients in hospital? Well, in 2018, there was a study by a team of occupational therapists. and they studied 18 older adult inpatients to review how they spent their time on an acute physical ward. Participants, expectedly, reported time on the ward as being boring, with long periods of inactivity, and one participant described it as like being in a prison. Again, I think this is something we can all relate to, whether we're clinicians or whether we're someone who spent time in hospital. But all of those participants expressed a willingness to engage in activity, and particularly they highlighted the importance of this activity being meaningful. When asked about which activities they would suggest, the most popular activities were those that stimulated cognition. We know that inactivity in hospital can lead to deconditioning, reduced independence and increased dependence, reduced confidence, and it can increase someone's fear of falling. We know that a lot of patients report being bored whilst in hospital, and we know that feelings of boredom can impact on mental health. Providing opportunities for people to engage in meaningful activity is one way that we can reduce these risks. In 2017, I returned from maternity leave and changed base from Lightburn Hospital to Glasgow Royal Infirmary. I quickly realised that opportunities to engage in meaningful activity was something that was lacking for our patients, and that many of them would benefit from this opportunity, including those living with dementia or those experiencing delirium. I explored various ways of providing a service that would support people to engage in activity, and quickly met with our volunteer manager, who, due to a psychology background, is also very much aware of the importance of meaningful activity. It's fair to say, as usual with me, one conversation led to another, and we had a bit of a plan. Louise and I decided to attempt to establish a volunteer service, which would be hosted within the older people's occupational therapy service at Glasgow Royal Infirmary. This was a change from the norm because the volunteers had been hosted by the volunteer manager, and she directed their work. The aim of the service was to provide stimulation, to promote meaningful activity, and give support to older people in our wards, particularly those living with dementia, as I said, those with delirium, or those who were socially isolated. The plan was that this would be overseen by the ward occupational therapist, who not only had a good overview of all of our older people's wards, but can identify those who would benefit from input, are highly skilled in tailoring and adapting activity, as well as able to identify activities that would be suitable for individuals. The volunteers utilise a range of resources available at ward level and within the department, and this includes activity boxes, which you can see a photograph of one on the slide. These contain a range of materials, and every one of them is slightly different, but this one here has playing cards, board games, picture books for reminiscence, quizzes and songs. Volunteers use these materials to provide company and stimulation to patients, but the sessions are very much person-centred, with the patient leading the content of the session. So sometimes all they want to do is have a chat, or to look at items that they have in with them, such as photos, magazines, get well cards or books. The volunteers also have a topic prompt sheet, which can help support with potential areas for discussion if initiating a conversation is more tricky. The volunteers have been very well received across the service. In particular, therapy staff have found the interaction with volunteers useful for really getting to know our patients. This in turn helps with understanding what really matters to them as individuals, to set personalised goals, and to assist in the development of a good therapeutic relationship. I'd like to share one of the many great examples that we have of the benefits of the volunteers. So one of our volunteers was spending time speaking to a patient who told her that she'd been enjoying therapy input on the ward. She felt that she was getting stronger. She felt she was getting more confident because of this. But she struggled to remember the instructions and the advice given to her by the therapy staff. She didn't want to tell them. With her consent, this was fed back to the ward therapy staff, who went on to provide written instructions and advice. I don't think we'd have got this crucial information if it hadn't been for this volunteer skills in questioning and providing reassurance. However, we were lucky that we did, and we were able to make a positive change for this particular lady. It is important to acknowledge that establishing a volunteer service has not been without its challenges. In particular, recruitment is an issue. All of our volunteers so far have been occupational therapy or psychology students. Mostly they've commenced volunteering in the last year of study as the reality of graduation and the need for a good CV looms. This creates an issue with retention, as they're just becoming confident and established, then graduate and get jobs. We've tried to engage students earlier on in their careers, but with some limited success. Additionally, we have to understand that our student volunteers have lots of conflicting demands. So not only are they volunteering, they have part-time jobs, they have university to attend, placements, assignments, family, household demands, and that all-important leisure time. So this means that we need to understand these demands, but demonstrate flexibility around the attendance of the volunteers. Despite these challenges, Louise and I built the occupational therapy volunteer service from 1 volunteer, 2.5 hours per week initially, to 5 volunteers providing input to patients on our wards Monday to Friday. We had plans to further increase the number of volunteers we had at any one time to allow more patients to benefit from their input, and this service has now been running successfully for 3 years. In terms of the feedback that the volunteers have received, this first slide, I know it's a bit big, is a GREATEX award, which for those who aren't familiar, within healthcare we have an incident reporting system known as DATEX, but GREATEX is in contrast to that, and it's used to recognise good practice, to acknowledge the positive things that staff do, and ensure there can be learning from excellence. And I think it's fair to say that the ultimate feedback always comes from our patients and families. And I think particularly for volunteers, it's rewarding when feedback comes from those that you've been working with. One of our volunteers was nominated for this award by an OT colleague to recognise the feedback received from a family member. A lady's son had come to the ward during a volunteer session. The lady had been anxious and tearful, and the volunteer demonstrated excellent communication skills and was able to provide reassurance to her. She spent time using reminiscence to reduce the lady's distress, and her son was then able to sit with his mum and continue that conversation. Her son was so impressed with what he observed that he took the time to feed back to a member of staff. And later on, I will give further examples of GREATEX awards received over the last few weeks for person-centred care. In order to capture some information around the volunteers, I conducted a survey of occupational therapy staff and a separate survey for the volunteers. And the slide in front of you is the feedback. It's a word cloud for those who aren't familiar. So the larger words are the most commonly used words by responders, and the smaller words are the less commonly used. And this was a free text box, and people were asked just to write what they thought about the volunteer service. From occupational therapy staff, as you can see, the feedback was very positive. Staff reported that the volunteers provided patients with stimulation, with reassurance and with company. But interestingly and reassuringly, they also used really positive words such as quality, time, listening and diversity to describe the impact of the volunteers. And I think this really shows how highly regarded the volunteers are. But it was also important for us that the volunteers got something out of volunteering. If they don't see a personal benefit to their role, it's easy to lose commitment and interest. The volunteers reported that volunteering within the OT service increased their communication skills, their confidence and their team working skills, but that it supported patients in terms of well-being, meaningful activity and social inclusion. The benefits to our volunteers have been clear. With all of our volunteers who have left, they have done so only because they have found full-time employment. In late 2019, myself and the volunteers were approached to participate in a multi-agency project. This was titled NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde and Glasgow Life Partnership to support people living with dementia and their carers. And this project also included input from Christine Steele, from Sandra Shields, the Alzheimer's Scotland Dementia Nurse Consultant, Glasgow Life, and the NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde Library Service. The aim of this project was to trial the use of iPads, which until very recently had been a rarity on the wards, with older people in hospital to access free materials offered by Glasgow Life, So this includes some fantastic resources such as e-books, e-music, and really up-to-date e-magazines, as well as online museum collection artefacts. It was anticipated that the volunteers would use these resources during sessions with patients to promote meaningful activity, stimulate cognition, and provide opportunity for reminiscence, as well as reducing isolation. The volunteers would create and personalise a library account with items of interest, which could be used in hospital, but more importantly, also be accessed at home and used by patients and families once they were discharged. It was also hoped that this would raise awareness of all of the services that Glasgow Life offer in terms of support and information. This project, not without its hurdles, had reached its final stage before rollout. Volunteers and staff had been trained, iPads sought, literature for patients and families created. However, COVID-19 came along and put that project on hold. I think it's fair to say that COVID-19 changed how we work in hospitals literally overnight. You'll be aware of some of the changes, but for those not familiar with hospitals, I will explain some of them that occurred. So overnight, our volunteers were no longer able to access the wards, so our multi-agency iPad project was put on hold and the volunteer service that we had was suspended. Visitors were now restricted significantly, so patients were at risk of becoming more socially isolated. We did have additional iPads for FaceTime, etc., but we know that that's not suitable for everyone. We had issues initially with getting patient belongings in and out of hospital. Nobody comes into hospital organised, so nobody had footwear, clothes, mobile phone, charger, books or magazines. But that's slightly better now that we've got a give and go service where relatives can drop belongings off. The newspaper, or goodie trolley as it's better known, can't visit the wards, and our patients struggle to get to the shop for various reasons: medical limitations, physical limitations, and the shop doesn't take cash. Patients need to be socially distanced wherever possible, and you'll all be familiar with the fact that staff now have to wear PPE, and as you can see in the picture, masks and visors, which make communicating difficult and can be intimidating for some people. Initially, it's fair to say there was a general sense of anxiety in the wards, and I don't think hospitals are unique in that. I think there was just a general sense of anxiety in the population. But within the hospital environment, the TV and radio was on most of the time, reporting COVID-19 stories, and COVID seemed to be the topic of conversation wherever you went. There were huge overnight changes, but we were very aware that these changes, although necessary, could have an impact on someone's experience of hospital. Further to these changes, we were also dealing with older people who have multiple conditions, often living with frailty, who now have a diagnosis of COVID-19. For those not familiar, early evidence suggests that older people with COVID-19 have an atypical presentation. That is, that they present with things like falls, reduced mobility, and delirium initially, rather than that widely publicised cough, temperature, or loss of smell or taste. And at a local level, that's exactly what we found. We found increased rates of delirium, reduced mobility, but the main issue was fatigue. And although these are symptoms that we often see in acutely unwell older people, there was definitely a higher level of fatigue among those with COVID-19. Another major issue was anxiety. Anecdotally, we found patients anxious about their medical condition and about what that meant for them, anxious about their loved ones, some of whom also had a diagnosis of COVID, anxious about making other people unwell. So how would their diagnosis impact on their family? How would it impact on the health of the staff caring for them? Whilst completely necessary, the changes within the wards in terms of visiting, infection control, and the loss of the volunteers, as well as the presentation of COVID, further added to the issues being experienced by our patients. And although we were working hard to deal with the immediate situation in terms of ensuring our patients were receiving occupational therapy input to manage symptoms, maximise their function, and commence early rehabilitation, we were very aware that there were additional needs to be met given the presentation of our patients. I think it's important before I move on to talk about the paper, to recognise that there have been amazing examples locally and nationally of person-centred care during COVID-19. Locally, and referring back to that GREATEX scheme, some of our occupational therapy staff have received awards for person-centred care. This has included facilitating family pictures to be emailed in, which were then laminated and used therapeutically with a patient to reduce her distress, to setting up a free tuck shop to make sure that patients had access to goodies, and also facilitating patients to attend funerals virtually. Whilst incredibly difficult, this has ensured that our patients have some way of saying goodbye to loved ones. So the newspaper, where did the idea come from? Well, I have been asked this quite a few times, and I'd really like to say that it was something exceptionally technical. But actually, it was more important than that. It came from a conversation with those who matter the most, and that was a patient on a ward. It started with a conversation with a man who was looking for a newspaper. He advised he normally read the paper in the morning, and he missed not being able to read the news, to have a wee look through the sport, and to find out what was going on locally, and he quite liked the crossword. Normally we don't have any issues locating a paper, but with the restrictions in the wards it was a bit more of a challenge, but we did manage to get him one. But it got me thinking about what we could do that would help more of our patients. I felt it was important to provide something that would stimulate cognition, that would encourage conversation, that would bring some positivity and reduce the social isolation in the wards. And I thought the idea of a small daily newspaper would help with this. As I'd worked with the volunteer service before, I thought this would be a good place to start to see if we could get them on board. And luckily they agreed, and they also agreed that it was not a bad idea. Luckily for us, we had a digital art student in the Glasgow School of Art volunteering with us, and he also agreed to help. We set about creating a template of things that we might want to include. So this included making sure that it always had the day, the date, the time, the month and the year to support with orientation. We included songs and poems and pictures of landmarks from the local area and pictures of art that might stimulate a conversation or a memory. A small puzzle, a word search, a quiz to stimulate cognition, and importantly, a good news story that would bring some positivity and encourage conversation. But the story had to not be related to COVID-19, as we felt the stories circulating around COVID were very negative and could exacerbate anxieties. The occupational therapy team and the volunteers source items for inclusion, which the volunteers then use to populate that initial template. The most challenging thing is to find a good news story. These seem scarce at the moment, but every day we have managed to locate at least one. Our medical illustrations department have supported in printing it off, and initially the paper was circulated to our older people's wards at GRI. But that lasted for 2 days, because after that time the paper had found its way onto social media, and we had requests from all over NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde for copies. So we had to rebrand the paper, so it became the Hospital Times, and it's now circulated via email to every NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde site, Monday to Friday. So here is the finished article. The paper is short, it's printed on 2 sides of A4, and it's a Word document that we've all got access to. So we can change the format. So for example, we can increase the font size or alter the font type, for example. You can see from the picture that this is one of this week's papers, and it included 2 good news stories and a short quiz. We always include the answers, and it does have a song as well. We're aware that not every patient will be able to engage with all of the content, but staff have been supporting patients where appropriate and tailoring the content. So for example, looking and talking about the pictures rather than the news story itself, or using some content to initiate a conversation, for example, about school days or Glasgow. Before I move on to direct feedback, I'd like to share with you some observations from the wards. So the first paper included the famous Julie Keith song, and this initiated some singing on a ward, with a small group of ladies joining to sing the song. This led to discussions with staff around just how many verses and choruses the song may have, and who knew how many versions there were of this song. It really was an education for us all. There then was some discussion about other famous songs and some reminiscence around songs from youth, with a gentleman discussing quiz questions across their bed space. When I say discussing, it maybe was a little bit more intense than that, but luckily we didn't need a referee. With our occupational therapy staff using the paper as part of a therapy session to build relationships and to increase motivation. And we've had numerous discussions between patients and staff about the news stories or about the artwork. And that's facilitated ongoing discussions, which has helped us to get to know our patients better. But the one thing that we didn't anticipate is how well received it would be by staff, who have also been discussing the content amongst themselves and completing quizzes during breaks, and I'm sure it provides a distraction for them as well. I have to say, I have been a little overwhelmed at times from the feedback and interest that the paper has received, but I'm pleased that it's making a difference during what is a challenging time for everyone. And what is more important to me is that patients are reporting the benefits and that they look forward to it being delivered every day. You can see from the slide here some of the feedback that we've had. So we've had the occupational therapist who uses it as a tool to build therapeutic relationships and to generate discussion. We've got the nursing staff who report that the ladies in the ward love it and that it cheers people up. The support worker, again, acknowledging that patients enjoy the quizzes in particular and like to chat about the answers. But the most important piece of feedback on there is the one that's in a slightly different colour, and that comes from the patient herself. And she said, I enjoy reading it every day. It gives me something to do and the puzzles keep my brain stimulated. The stories are always happy and it makes me feel connected with the outside world. I don't really know what more we could have asked for. But as usual, things aren't quite finished there. So NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde ran a story about the paper via their social media channels. And this led to a nurse involved with a community singing group which supports people with chronic respiratory conditions to contact me. Initially, she was asking us to promote their group, which had moved online due to COVID restrictions. But this conversation sparked a discussion about the issues being experienced by our patients, so the fatigue and the shortness of breath, and how the traditional ways of delivering inpatient therapy, so for example, practicing getting in and out of bed, getting washed and dressed, was more difficult and having to be graded significantly. So this sparked an idea, and that was for an inpatient singing group within our 2 satellite rehabilitation wards. Now this group is at a very early stage in terms of development. We're currently gathering evidence and scoping out how it might look for our patients. But we know the benefits of singing are widely known. It can reduce breathlessness, reduce anxiety, improve mood, stimulate cognition and reduce social isolation. And more importantly, nearly everyone can take part, or at least enjoy the benefits of listening to singing. Although I'm not really sure that anybody wants to be subjected to me singing, so I think we need to think this one through just a little bit more. In conclusion, yes, the last few months have been challenging, and it's been disheartening to have projects that you've worked on for a long time put on hold. But we don't normally let things stop us, so we're trying to find new ways of working to ensure we meet our patients' needs and to ensure that they receive the best input possible when they come into hospital. I've included very quickly just a reference that I've used there. And to finish, I just want to take a little minute to say thank you to the amazing volunteers, not only across NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde, but all organisations, especially now as it's Volunteers Week. Without them, the paper and our other projects wouldn't have been the success that it is. I'm sure you've got a sense from what I've said that there are so many professions and agencies involved in the work that we've done, and we couldn't possibly name them all individually. So again, I'd like to thank everyone who's been involved in these projects and to everyone who's been supportive and provided feedback. Most importantly, I want to say thanks to all our patients and families for their interest, their engagement, their support and feedback. And I want to thank you for your time today. I hope you found some of this information useful, but most importantly, I hope it will inspire and generate other ideas. Shall we move to questions?
Hello, that's lovely. Thank you very much, Lynsey. And here's Alison, and I think Elaine's going to come online as well. So, do we have some questions?
Yeah, that was great. Thanks very much, Lynsey. So I'm going to ask you a couple of the questions, if that's okay, and then Elaine's going to ask a few other questions. So thanks very much. Lots of interest in the work and lots of great comments on how fantastic it is. So I'll kick off. One of the questions we've got here was, what has been the biggest challenge in terms of the newspaper? Has there been any challenges, or did it all go quite smoothly?
I think the biggest challenge really is actually trying to find something positive in terms of news to put in it every day. I think it wasn't until you actually go hunting for that kind of news that you realise that it's quite scarce at the moment. So that is a bit of a challenge. And also a bit of a challenge is kind of how successful it's been and how much time it's ended up taking in terms of communicating with people who are interested or who have other ideas. But apart from that, it's actually went quite smoothly.
Fantastic, thank you. And I'll ask another one as well. Quite a bit of interest on the Greatex work that you shared as well, and really wondering, is that something that's kind of used across the organisation, and have you noticed any differences with this being used?
I'm not actually sure of where else it's being used. I'm not sure about whether it can be used across organisations, but I'm happy to find that out and feed back to whoever asked the question. I've definitely noticed a sense of positivity in terms of the Greatex Awards. So we have a Greatex wall within the occupational therapy department, and everybody in the department who gets a Greatex, it gets put up on the wall so that all staff can acknowledge it. And I think there is that general sense of that people are recognised for the sometimes small things that they do that are above and beyond their role or their job. So it's definitely well received.
Fantastic, and there's some comments coming in for other areas saying that that's something that's used there as well, so that's fab. So thanks very much, Lynsey, and I'll pass over to Elaine.
Yeah, Christine, do you want to add to the answer? Yeah.
I was just going to add in there that I think historically as well, hospital walls are notoriously a place where statistics for less positive things are kept. You know, it is somewhere that you would look to see when the last incident of a fall had been or something. And I think that, you know, there's something wonderful about that, about celebrating that in such a public way that, you know, if you are coming to the end of a tiring day or a tiring week, and you walk past that, just the difference that that's going to do to your mood. So I think that's a brilliant idea.
Okay, I'll just ask a couple of questions. There's questions coming from Tommy saying, great presentation, thank you, but they're wondering how the occupational therapy at the Beeston could access the paper, and moreover, how would you get access to this sort of a colour copy as well? So it's really about access to the paper.
Yeah, we have an email circulation, so we have a contact for that, so I can maybe get in touch afterwards and pass that on. In terms of colour copy, that's the bit we've really struggled with, because we're very lucky that we have medical illustrations here on site and that we can get it in colour, and I'm aware that that has been a bit of an issue. We have had, we're aware that there's a couple of other colour printers, which again seem to be quite scarce, and they've been used on other sites, but that is a challenge, is getting coloured copies to other sites, and we're aware of that.
Okay. Christine, do you want to add anything to that one?
No, I agree. No, I think it is just one of those realities of hospital life is dreary black and white paper. And I think what was nice when Lynsey was talking there, I was aware I was smiling at points, you know, when she was describing things like the song, because that's something that you can do without necessarily even looking at the paper, you know. So I think that there's imaginative ways, I guess, that you can use to maybe overcome some of that if you do have challenges. Even just accessing a printer, I know, can be difficult for some areas.
Okay. Yeah.
One of the other solutions that we have had and we've suggested to other sites is a lot of the wards now have iPads, so we've suggested even opening the emailed document on an iPad and being able to show the patient the coloured version of it there. So if it's a particular photograph, then to use the iPads for that.
Great. Okay. I've got another question as well from Lisa. Again, sort of same fabulous piece of work, but one of the questions was just like a bit more detail of the activity boxes.
Yep, so the activity boxes were actually one of our lead nurses who'd come up with that idea as a project. So essentially they are plastic boxes that are filled with any resources that we have. So as I said, some of them have packs of cards, some of them have colouring in, some of them have books of pictures which are maybe a kind of the local area, some have colouring in, I believe some of them may have iPods in them or some other kind of music listening device. And they essentially live on the wards and they can be accessed by any member of staff or any family member if they're in, and they can be used with patients to provide meaningful activity or to reduce distress.
Great, thank you. And I've got one more question, if that's okay, Alison, just to ask the panel. Just really interested in how you recruited the students, because you said occupational therapy students and you had a digital arts student as well, just how you recruited them.
Certainly, so the occupational therapy and the psychology students, so if we take the digital art student out of the equation at the moment, those students were recruited by contact with the university. So our volunteer manager, she is responsible for all of the recruitment of volunteers, and often in kind of communications online and email and on the NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde website. We advertise for volunteers, and quite often on Twitter. But we went directly to the university and we've done recruitment fairs in the university to try and attract students. We know that they've got a lot of really good skills. The digital art student actually came from the COVID-19 volunteers. So COVID-19 has given us a significant number of volunteers from a variety of different backgrounds, and that's how he ended up volunteering with us.
Okay, great.
Can I ask, and I know, Lynsey, that you're happy as well to connect with people afterwards and link in, because there's lots of really great comments coming through and people really keen to link in with you. So Nikki here as well is asking how you managed to get the funding for the newspaper and the boxes and things. Was that something you had to do a bit of work around, or?
I'm sorry, Alison, I didn't catch the end of that.
It was Nikki was asking about how you managed to secure funding for the newspaper and the activity boxes and things.
So the activity boxes was a lead nurse project, so I'm not sure where the funding came from her. I imagine it came from her budget. The newspaper, we were actually lucky in that Sandra Shields has provided some of the budget towards getting 50 copies printed for the Royal Infirmary. Apart from that, it's local departments that are printing them themselves from their own local budget.
Great, thanks very much.
Okay, I think that's the questions for just now, if that's okay, unless Christine or Lynsey, have you got any final comments you want to share about the work, or it's been really interesting.
No, I would just, I would echo that. Obviously, I was very grateful to Lynsey for coming and sharing her experiences today, and just that I think it's reassuring to hear that journey of, Project A, and having been involved in the project with the iPads, knowing the time investment, emotional investment, and getting to a point where you're ready to go live with a project. And it can sometimes feel a bit disheartening when you're not then able to go forward with it as you'd anticipated. But I think what's nice is, it's taken the essence of that and transferring it into something else that meets the needs of the individuals and of our current situation. And I think a lot of the questions that are coming up this week with all the different blogs is about how some of these new ways of working are going to be carried on in the future, and what we can learn from the changes that we've made, really, in terms of developing our practice. It's been really good.
That's great. Thank you very much, everybody. I think we're coming to the end of our webinar session time today. The time goes very quickly in these sessions, and I'd like to thank you all in the audience for joining us today, for your great discussion and your interest. And on behalf of all of you, I'd like to thank Lynsey for sharing all of her ideas and her practice with us, and to Lynsey and Christine for taking time to join us today. So the webinar has been recorded and you will receive an email with a link to the recording. But we would love to hear from you again, the audience, before you leave today. So in a moment, when we finish, you will have a screen, and on the screen we'll ask you a few questions and you can share your thoughts about today's webinar. But also what we'd love to hear from you about is, what are you thinking that you might go away and do now that you've listened to today? And so something that you might put into action. So I'm going to say goodbye for now, but please join us tomorrow for our final in our week of webinars. And tomorrow's topic is always a very important topic. It's about food and nutrition, close to everybody's heart. So hopefully you'll join us tomorrow. And meanwhile, have a good evening and stay safe. Goodbye for now.
Bye.